Hey everybody, what's up? It is your favorite know-it-all Chris, back from my vacation holiday, if you will, and back in the saddle with a new video on The Magicians. This is episode 2 of my Magicians Season 1 overview. You can find the first installment of this series, which covers episodes 1 through 3, linked in the description, and I'll also throw it up in the right corner. If this is your first time here, I take shows and movies based on books and compare and contrast them to the source material. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of my future videos, and click that notification icon to join the notification squad, as it were, and be the first to know when something new drops. Warning, there may be spoilers ahead since I discuss what happens in the TV show and compare it to the book, and sometimes that reveals things down the road or changes in the show that might actually spoil things for you in the future. So if you don't want to see that, now's the time to stop the video. I'm going to quickly go through each episode and highlight key moments and characters that are different in this show than the book. In this video, we're going to cover episodes 4 through 7. So without further ado, let's do this thing. Episode 4. The what now? This was an odd episode and not one that I really enjoyed all that much. It's another moment with no correlation in the books, but I did love the moment when Penny sees the version of himself in the dream and calls him a racist, all that stuff. It was perfect. Having Julia attack Quentin like that was just wrong from a narrative standpoint and was really not... they've upped the drama, I guess, in some of these circumstances, and I can understand why, because the first book was kind of boring, if I'm going to be straight with you guys. It was just them in school being angsty teens, because it was college instead of graduate school, and I can understand why they wanted to add some liveliness and drama to it. I just wish they would have chosen to do it some other way. Another issue for me, though, is the fact that they could attack Quentin within the school at all. The school has wards, a lot of them, to specifically stop this sort of thing from happening, as well as from chaotic magic from students who don't know what they're doing getting outside. I feel like this was added for a few reasons. One, to make the hedge witches a credible threat, since this whole storyline is new for the show. And to give Penny a greater role in the lives of the Scooby Gang, which, I'm okay with that, because the Penny character from the TV shows is one of my favorite. Also, Julia, being thrown out of the magical underground wasn't exactly kosher either. I get that they did it to set up the storyline with Our Lady Underground, which is coming real soon, but I really prefer the way that particular storyline happened more in the books than in the show. Okay, episode 5. First up, we have Fogg retrieves Alice. Broken record, I know, but this wasn't in the books either, since Alice never left the school. But this was a great addition to the story. Having Fogg go after her and convince her to come back was another great change to his character. He was a pretty one-dimensional, one-note, boring character in the novels. So, any coloring or building out that they do here with his character is great with me, because the actor is fantastic, and giving him more to do is only going to benefit the show. Next up, we have the mentors. I really dug this part. They do talk about mentors and all that in the novels, but it comes after they graduate. Basically, it's the novel's version of continuing education. And giving Penny a mentor that travels and has had the misfortune of misusing his gift was great, since Penny in the show has a massive chip on his shoulder, and giving someone like that an ability as dangerous as this one could spell doom for everyone involved. Next up, we have Quentin's dad. I really loved that they brought his father in early, and having them deal with relationship issues was great. In the novels, we never really meet Q's dad. He becomes a plot point later in the narrative, only after he dies. I also loved how they described cancer and why it isn't fixed by magic. This whole quest of Q's was a nice introduction to begin answering the how and why of what is and isn't doable from a magical standpoint. And personally, I love the idea that the magicians don't understand cancer and think it might actually be some sort of curse levied upon the human race some time in the distant past was just beautiful, because cancer is a curse. It's horrible. The bit where you see Q has powered up in the Welters tournament is sort of in the book as well, but his new power level isn't shown at the tournament like that. Actually, in the novels, it's Josh who creates the black hole, because his character is really, really powerful, but kind of a dum-dum, and so he doesn't really focus well and kind of botches things, and so he either doesn't have anything to give, or when he does it, it just blows the wall down. So it was kind of nice to have that in the show, and have it with someone who's a bit more reliable. Julia's Fall. This was in the book as well, but not quite in this way. It is told in flashbacks, for the most part, as Julia is cluing Q into her life after she was rejected from Brakebills. This happens much later. One thing that I missed from this part was the way Julia tore her way through the safe houses. In the books, you are basically called out when you walk into a safe house and you have a magic off with the senior hedge witch. Once you prove yourself, you are able to see the grimoire, quote unquote, which is like a trapper keeper for spells, as we saw in the show. The scene in the bar is what happens at most of the places that Julia goes to. But I really miss the duels. Having Julia basically crush the best that they have to offer as business-like as possible was just beautiful. And I miss that. And lastly, Cancer Puppy. I mean, no, this just wasn't in the novels. Why would you kill a puppy? Just moving on. Okay, episode 6, we have the trials. This wasn't in the novels either, but I loved it. It added a layer of intrigue and fun to the school, which was basically missing in the novels. Our hero's time at Brakebills was basically through a slog of magical academia. Sure, there were parties and all of that, but nothing that really took away from the boring mundanity of life. Having there be something that is fun, build relationships, etc. was nice to have. It was also a nice moment to see Penny appreciate Q just a little bit and work together to get past the first hurdle in the first trial. Also, Penny using astral projection to cheat was hilarious. Next up, we have Margo is far superior to Janet. I really, really hated Janet in the books. Her character is pretty much worthless, irritating, and vapid. By contrast, Margo is many of these things, but also interesting and complex in the best possible ways. Much like a onion, a trifle, or an ogre, she has layers. Beneath the terrible exterior, there's an actual human being with feelings and motivations beyond, just herself. From her relationship with Eliot to her real, actual feelings for Alice, we see that there are motivations within Margo that we can actually identify with. The character of Janet in the books, you couldn't identify, unless you're a horrible human being who hates everything, including herself. It's really hard to identify with her character and her motivations at all, which is kind of a miss when you're reading a novel. And lastly, we have, fittingly enough, the last trial. This is another great addition to the story, from Penny's exchange with Katie, giving his character much needed depth, to the shared moment between Q and Alice, where you find out the secrets they're hiding. It was really masterfully done. While all of that was new for the show, the ending where they transform into geese, that was straight up out of the books, although it happens much later and in a very different way in the novels. Okay, finally, we're going to talk about episode 7, Brakebills South. This was one of my favorite parts of the novels because it was a glimpse into the largeness of the magical world. During the flight to the school, the kids get a glimpse of the world as it appears to the geese, full of magic and possibility. The geese can actually see the magnetic spectrum and use it to find their way to the school. It is the first glimpse we are given that there is magic elsewhere in the world. Something that is paid off much later when we get a glimpse of deep old magic being kept at bay by whales. I really hope they get to that part in the show, because it was just beautiful to read and it would be amazing to see on the screen. So, a little divergent there. I really loved the time they spent there as well. It isn't covered in great detail in the show, but they spent a lot of time driving nails into wood, not just once, and then a ton of time removing them, not just once. It was at Brakebills South that the Scooby Gang really learned how to be magicians. Nothing really important happened at South other than their learning and abuse at the hands of their teacher, other than the bit with the foxes and the sex. Of course, in the novels, all the students were turned into foxes, not just Q and Alice. That being said, one thing that was missing for me with the story of Brakebills South was the race to the pole. In the novels, the end of the semester, basically, is a race over the frozen wastes to a pole where you're naked and aren't allowed to bring anything with you. Quentin and Alice were the only two to take up the challenge of the race for that cohort or year, whatever you want to call them. And they both finished, although Alice soundly beat him, which, of course she did. She's the genius magician. It was pretty cool to see how they both dealt with the obstacles at hand, what magic they used to survive and all of that stuff. And it would have been a really beautiful way to cap off Brakebills South, especially with the ending, because in the novels, you've basically followed Quentin the whole time. And the ending is him falling into the arms of the Russian professor whose name escapes me right now. Maritrovsky or something like that I'll put it in the video there to correct myself, who was waiting for him at the pole. And you spent the entire novel with his character kind of hating the teacher because he's this horrible human being. And then you learn in that moment that he actually cared about the students, and the way he taught them was because of how serious it was to be a magician, and they didn't really get that at the normal Brakebills. And so it was a nice moment of not tenderness, but there is care there, and his facade kind of fell away a little bit. And his facade is in place for a very good reason, which we won't cover right now because they haven't talked about it in the show, but he's at Brakebills South for a very specific reason, and he is jaded and acts the way he does for very specific reasons. He's not just an asshole. And lastly, we have the Djinn. This, while funny, wasn't in the novels either. I was hoping it would be a bigger part of the story, though, because it was super fun while it lasted. It was nice to have another aspect of the magical world showcased, if only briefly. It hints at a much larger, weirder world than the one we have seen thus far, which can, only be good. If a Djinn exists, what other... Are there leprechauns and things like that? Trolls under bridges? I mean, you can't just sprinkle that in front of us, tease a little bit, dangle it there, and then not let us know how big and wide and weird this world is. I mean, they do get into it a little bit more in later seasons when they get pixies and things, but the Djinn is more of it's a genie. It's just different, and it would have been nice to have a bit more exploration, like, is the genie the only thing? Is it a magical construct? Did someone create the genie, or is the genie a magician that got cursed? Like, it's a pretty interesting, fruitful ground that was not in the novels at all. So they could have just done anything they wanted. So that would have been really nice to see. Okay, that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about the magicians, please leave them in the comments, and I'll try to answer them. I used to be a part of the Magicians Facebook group, but they're a bunch of jerks over there, so I am no longer a part of that group. And I'm just kind of hanging out here. And you can find me on Facebook, though, at just look for Chris J. Davis. That's the pretty good bet. You can find me anywhere if you just look for Chris J. Davis. So find me on Facebook, ask questions on Twitter, or you can just leave comments and questions here. And I will see you guys in the next one. Take it easy.